Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. Chapter 1. Squire Trelawney, Dr. Livesey, and some gentlemen alike asked me many times to write down all I know about Treasure Island. This is why I am telling my story about Treasure Island, which started when I was 17. My father owned the Admiral Benbow Inn at Black Hill Cove. I can clearly remember an old seaman arriving at our place. I remember his physical appearance. He was a tall, strong, and dirty man with a deep cut on his cheek. I remember him singing the famous sea song with his deep voice. 15 men on the dead man's chest, yo-ho-ho, and a bottle of rum. He was a man quite different from the others. He called for a glass of rum. While he was watching the scene of the cow outside, he told us that he liked the wildness and loneliness of it. It must be a pleasure for many men to be here, stated the seaman. My father agreed. I really like the place. Now I have decided to stay here. You can call me, he said. Then he threw down some coins and told us to warn him when they all are over. As I said before, he was a strange man. He didn't like to talk to anyone in the inn. Instead, he did a long walk around the cave. In the evenings, when he was usually drunk, he liked to tell his wild and disturbing stories about his criminal life at sea. People used to dislike listening to him. Our customers were usually quiet and calm people. They were bothered by him at first, but then they got accustomed to leaving him alone by not being interested in him or his stories. He made asking if any seaman had gone along the road a behavior in time. At first, we used to think he felt lonely and he wanted to know the presence of a person from his kind. But later on, we realized that this was not the truth. He was wondering about a unique person, a seaman with one leg. He warned us to tell him immediately when a man like this ever appeared. He told me that he would pay me a silver coin per month from being a watchman to one-legged seaman. Also, he promised me that as soon as I see him, he would give me a big reward. Having heard his words, I got excited and dreamt about seeing that one-legged seaman for days. Days passed by, but the captain was still staying in our inn, although his coins were used up. We were too polite to ask him for more. One day, Dr. Livesey arrived in our inn late in the afternoon. I remember observing the contrast between Dr. Livesey and the captain. The doctor had white hair, a pleasant way of speaking, and he was certainly a decent kind of man. On the other hand, Captain was a heavy, dirty, and drunk seaman. He was singing his eternal song. 15 men on the dead man's chest, yo-ho-ho, and a bottle of rum. As soon as Dr. Livesey heard the song, he moved his head with a tint of anger on his face, and then looked at the captain, meaning that he doesn't like his singing loudly at all. But Doctor was the only one who cared about the captain there. Suddenly, Captain beat the table with his hand loudly. All the voices suddenly died away, except for Dr. Livesey's. The captain shouted, "Silence!" The doctor said, "Are you telling it to me?" "Yes," the captain told him, swearing. The doctor was kind to the captain. I believe that he wanted to avoid an argument with Captain that moment. "Listen to me," the doctor said. "If you keep on drinking rum, the world will be free of a dirty scoundrel. Do you hear me?" The captain stood up with the knife in his hand, aiming to frighten the doctor. But the doctor never moved. What's more surprising is, he continued with a tranquil voice and a cool posture. "If you don't put that knife away, be sure that you'll die under the law." Although Captain seemed to resist for a few minutes, with his frightening looks to the doctor, he soon gave up and sat down. Then Dr. Livesey rode away on his horse. The captain became so silent for the rest of the evening and for many evenings to come. Chapter 2. It was a cold day in January. My father got ill that year. We were not sure whether he would see the spring or not. The winter was so hard and long, this made us more anxious. My mother was upstairs with my father. That morning, Captain woke up earlier than usual. He went to the beach without talking to anyone. I was in the kitchen preparing Captain's breakfast. Then suddenly the door opened, and a man with 3 fingers on his left hand, wearing a sailor's short sword by his side, stepped in. This was the first time I saw him. I asked him what he wanted, and he offered a glass of rum. While I was walking through to fetch it, he wanted me to come nearer, and as I approached, he asked, "Is this table for my friend Bill?" "I don't know who Bill is," I said. "This table is for the captain, who stays here." "Oh, he must be my old friend Bill," he said. "Does he have a sword cut on his face?" "Yes," I answered. I told him that Captain was out for a walk. While he was listening to me, he had a strange look on his face, which I certainly disliked. Soon we saw the captain drawing near. Suddenly the stranger pulled me behind the door. The captain opened the door and walked in. He didn't see us. "Bill!" shouted the man. The captain turned quickly and saw both of us as we stood behind the door. He got shocked and his face turned white. He seemed sick. "Black dog!" he said with a curious manner. "Why are you here?" he added. He was discontent with his circumstance. I offered a glass of rum. "Now we'll sit and talk like old friends, okay?" the stranger said. I brought him the rum, and they told me to go out. Nevertheless, I didn't want to, because I was so keen about what was going on. I pretended as if I was going away. While I was walking out, their voices became louder. "Oh my God, it's our end!" the captain shouted. "If one's caught, it means we'll all be caught." The shouts got louder, the words got heavier, and later, the sound of tables crashing over was heard. Next, there was the sound of terror, fight, and swords. Later on, the black dog ran out with blood running on his shoulder. He ran out of the inn and down the road. He didn't walk. He ran. In a few seconds, he had disappeared from sight. The captain shouted, "Jim, hurry up! Bring me my rum!" He made his way to the inn, but he was having trouble in walking for sure. He was hardly standing on his feet. It was obvious that he was feeling ill. I turned back to go to bring the rum when suddenly the captain fell down. I hurried back to the floor to help him. My mother came downstairs because she had heard the noise. We lifted the captain's head. His eyes were closed and his face was terrible color. We were trying to understand what was wrong with him hurriedly. Then Dr. Livesey came to the inn to help my father. We called for help from him for the captain, and he said, "He can't take much more rum. I warned him not to do. It is his luck to be alive." Captain opened his eyes and looked around curiously. I thought he wanted to be sure that Black Dog had gone. I was right. He, soon, asked where Black Dog was. "Black Dog is not here," answered the doctor. "If you stand now, I'll help you to your bed." Chapter 3. In the afternoon, I took some cool drinks and medicine to the captain. He was so weak and excited. "Jim," he said, "you're the only person here that's worth anything, and will you please bring me rum?" But the doctor said, I tried to begin, but I couldn't finish what I intended to say. He interrupted me by swearing about the doctor. "He is free of every knowledge about seamen. Rum is what I live for, and do you see it?" he cried. "1 glass will not kill me. I'll pay you for it. Please, boy." "I don't want extra money for this rum. I just want the money you owe my father. That's what my father told me. Now I'll bring you one, but no more," I said. He smiled gratefully and drank all I had brought quickly. "I hate staying in bed. I do not want that for a long time. Did the doctor tell when I will get out of bed?" Captain wondered. "You're going to stay in bed about a week," I replied. "A week?" he cried. "It's impossible. They'll have the black spot on me by then. They'll come here for me." "Who will? Black Dog?" I asked. "Not only him, some people worse as well," he said and continued. "It's my old sea chest they want, but they won't be able to take it. I'll show them. If they get the black spot on me, go to the doctor. Tell him to bring lots of law officers and a local judge. They can catch Flint's crew at the Admiral Benbow. I used to be Flint's first ship's officer, and now it's only me who knows the law. Don't do anything unless you see the black dog, unless they give me the black spot, or you see the seaman with one leg. He's the worst of all. It's okay, but I still couldn't understand what a black spot is, I said. It's a kind of knowledge, boy, he said. I'll tell you if they give me that. Upon my honor, boy. I'll give you half of everything I get. He talked weakly for a little longer, and after I'd given him his medicine, he fell into a deep sleep. I went away. That evening, as a shocking surprise, my father died quite suddenly. All the matters were in second plan for a long time while I was busy with funeral organizations. I had little time to think about Captain. The next morning, Captain came downstairs to tell me that he was so upset about my father's death. He drank a lot instead of eating. There were visits from our relatives, and we were arranging his funeral. So nobody had the time to try to stop him to drink rum. The next day was foggy, bitter, and cold. As I was standing out, thinking about my father sadly, I saw a man approaching. I thought he was blind because he was carrying a stick in his hand that helped him to feel his way. I hope you won't be bothered to tell me where I am, he said. You are at the Admiral Benbow Inn, Black Hill Cove, my kind friend, I replied. Oh, this voice belongs to a young man, doesn't it? He said while he was taking my hand. Then suddenly he held out my hand and pulled me violently towards him. Now, he said, take me to the captain, or I'll break your arm. His voice was the most cruel and calmest one I've ever heard. I couldn't say or ask anything more to him. I've tried to say I wouldn't do that, though. I just took him to the captain's room. Bill, sit where you are, said the man. I can't see, but I can hear a finger move. Now hold your right hand. Then he told me to take Captain's right hand to him. We both obeyed what he said. Later, I saw the blind man put something in Captain's hand. And now it's over, I heard him saying, and after that he left the inn at once. I heard his stick tapping along the road. As soon as the blind man had gone, the captain opened his hand and cried, 10 o'clock? Only 6 hours. He put his hand around his neck, made a strange sound, and fell to the floor. I ran to him at once, calling my mother. But this was in vain. The captain was dead. This was the second death I had known, that occurred when the sorrow of the first was still fresh in my heart. Chapter 4. As soon as I saw that it was written, "You have time till 10 o'clock tonight," on the paper that blind man gave the captain, I lost no time telling my mother that we were in danger. Mom decided to hide in the village in fear that the blind man and his friends may return. We must act bravely, and we must get the key to the sea chest, she said. We must get it before we leave. The captain owes us some money, so it's not such of a big deal when we take the money he was supposed to have given us. The key was around his neck on a string as a necklace. I cut the string, and we, my mother and I, went to his room to reach the chest, which we think had been in his room since the day he came. On the top of the chest it was a written letter B. There were 2 very fine pistols, some silver, pine tobacco, and an old deck in it. There were some papers tied up inside a cloth, and a bag of gold coins under those things. We got very surprised. I'll show these scoundrels that I'm an honest woman. I'll take what I'm owed and no more, said my mother. My mother had difficulty counting the money because there were all kinds of gold coins in the bag. There were French, Spanish, and English coins, so it was a slow work to find the English gold guineas we needed. As we were halfway through escaping, I heard a sound which was very terrifying. I then understood that the blind man was coming, because I heard his stick tapping and tapping. The man knocked on the door of the inn, but we didn't reply. The tapping of the stick started again, and slowly died away in the darkness of the night. Mom, I said, let's take the whole money and escape before it's too late. The door must have seemed suspicious to them. She didn't take what I said into consideration and went on counting. She didn't want more or less than we should have. But then the little whistle coming from outside made us quit everything we were doing. My mother said she would take what she has, and I picked up a cloth of papers thinking that it would complete what the captain must pay us. Quickly, we ran away from the inn, along the road to the village. Moonlight was the only light that helped us to find our way. The next moment, we heard someone running towards us. "My dear," said Mum, "take the money and run on, or I'm going to faint." "No," I replied, "I'll never leave you alone." In a very precise moment, I pulled her arm and took her down under a small bridge. Our fear was so big that it took our breath away. Soon, a group of 7 or 8 men ran past up, one of which was definitely the blind man. Silently, I climbed back up to the road and lay in the long grass to watch what was going on. "Down with the door!" cried the blind man. So 4 or 5 men broke down the door of the inn and got in. A loud cry was heard. "Bill is dead!" After that I heard the blind man swear. "Search him! What are you waiting for? Go upstairs and find the chest!" he shouted. I heard their feet on the stairs, then a voice shouting, "The money is here, but Flint's papers have gone." "Oh, it's these papers of the inn. It's that boy," roared the blind man. "Phew! I wish I had put his eyes out," he said, and added excitedly, "Now all of you, go find them." After then, sound of the horses and riders thundering on the road were heard. They were searching for us. They didn't wait for the blind Pew, but he tried to follow them with his stick. He was still in the middle of the road when the horses thundered up to the inn. Pew turned with a scream, but it was too late. The rider tried to save Pew, but it was in vain. Pew passed away under the horse's feet with a cry. He was dead, stone dead. I jumped up and shouted to the riders. One of them was Captain Dance, the law officer from the nearby town. He had heard reports of a pirate ship in Black Hill Cove and came looking for the pirates. I told him every detail I had seen, everything that had happened. He and his men ran after the pirates down into the cove after this. Unfortunately, they were late. The ship had already been out to sea. As Captain Dance was back, there was an obvious pleasure on his face. "Well," he murmured, "in the end we finished off Pew." After taking my mother to the house in the village, we went to the Admiral Benbow. What I experienced was enough for my whole lifetime, I thought. Inside the inn was plundered, smashed, and everything was broken. Mr. Dance asked me if I knew what they were looking for. "I see that they got the money from the chest, but I think I have the thing they want most. I should take it to a safe place. Perhaps Dr. Livesey should—" "Exactly," said Mr. Dance. "He is the local judge, and I should tell him that Pew is dead, or Squire Trelawney. You should also come with me to his house." And then, after this talk, we went to Dr. Livesey's house, but he was not at home. That's why we went to Squire's house after that. It was the first time that I had seen Squire Trelawney that close. He was sitting by the fire with Dr. Livesey. He was a large man with a red face. "Come in, Mr. Dance," were the first words I've heard from him. Mr. Dance started to tell about the story, and soon their eyes grew bigger and they started to pay great attention to what he said. Then he asked me, "Jim, as far as I see, you have the thing that they are looking for, don't you?" Almost after, I gave him the papers tied inside the cloth at once. Dr. Livesey took it and immediately put it into his pocket. Then Mr. Dance went away and they offered me something to eat. They were talking to each other and I was listening to them. "Now," said the doctor, "I think you know who Flint is?" "Do I know?" shouted Squire. "He was the worst pirate that has ever sailed. The Spanish used to tremble just to hear his name." "Well, everybody knows who he is, but the point is, was it him who had the money?" asked Doctor. "Oh, I'm sure he used to have plenty of it. Those scoundrels were after it." "Well, lucky for me then. I think I have here in my pocket a paper that shows where his treasure is hidden," replied the doctor. "It must be worth looking for." "We have a way to learn," said Squire. "I'll prepare a ship to Bristol, take you and Jim with me, and have that treasure after searching for at least 1 year." Later on, we opened the cloth and found a book and a paper in it. The book gave a list of all the money. Flint had stolen from different ships during 20 years on the sea. There was a map of an island on the paper. The hill in the center, called Spyglass, was marked, and other places and names were written later on. There were 3 big black crosses, 2 in the north of the island and 1 in the southwest. Besides the last cross were the words, "Most of the treasure was hidden here." On the back of the paper it was written, "Tall tree, Spyglass shoulder, to the north of northeast. Skeleton Island, east-south, east and by east. Tomorrow I'll start for Bristol. In 3 weeks' time we'll have the best ship and the finest crew in England. Jim, you should come as a cabin boy. I'm sure you'll be a famous one. You'll be the doctor, Livesey, and I'm going to be the admiral. We'll take 3 of my men, Redruth, Joyce, and Hunter," said Squire excitedly. "Trelawney," said the doctor, "I'll come with you, so I'm sure we'll Jim." "But there is someone I'm afraid of," replied the doctor. "So, who is that scoundrel? Name him," he cried. "It's you," the doctor said, "because I don't believe that you're going to keep silent. We are not the only men who know about this paper. Those who broke into the inn tonight would like to find out the same treasure. We must be alone until we set off. You'll take Joyce and Hunter to Bristol. Jim and I will stay here together. And meanwhile, we shouldn't tell anyone a word." "Livesey," replied the squire, "I'll be as silent as a grave." Chapter 15. The doctor had to go to London to find another doctor to take charge of his job, while he would be out to sea. I was staying with Tom Redruth in Doctor's house in the meanwhile until he came. So time kept on going, weeks passed, I studied the map letter to letter, dreaming of treasure, till one day there came a letter addressed to Dr. Livesey, with the addition that I was allowed to read it in case of emergency. In the letter I found following important news. Old Anchor Inn, Bristol, 1st of March. Dear Livesey, I am not sure whether you are at home or in London, so I send this to both places. The ship is ready for sailing. I am perfectly sure it is going to be the finest ship you would ever see. Her name is Hispaniola. I got her through one of my friends, Blandy, who, like everyone in Bristol, worked hard to find me a suitable ship when he knew the reason why we would be on board. Oh, I mean the treasure for sure. I looked for a crew of 20 men. They were all going to be necessary, even essential, in case we would have to battle. But I had the greatest difficulty finding the 6th. But lucky I met a man, which is now the man who I think is going to help us most, by a quite accidental conversation. He is an old seaman who keeps an inn. He knows all the seamen in Bristol, and he said he lost his health on shore, and wanted to get work as a cook to go back to sea again. His story was so touching that I hired him immediately as the cook. He is called Long John Silver. He has lost his one leg fighting for his country. He has no pension, though. Well, sir, I thought I had only found a cook, but it was a crew I had discovered. Silver and I got on well with each other. We are the parts of the toughest group of seamen you can imagine. I am looking forward for my ship's voyage. It's setting off. Come quickly. Livesey, please, if you respect me, do not lose an hour. Let young Jim go at once to say good-bye to his mother, and come quickly to Bristol with Redruth. John Trelawney. Postscript. Blandley found us a man to be our captain, and Silver found a man called Arrow to be first officer. The next day I went to the Admiral Benbow to visit my mother, and there I found her quite healthy and fine. I had difficulty saying good-bye to my mum, as I felt sorry to leave her alone. But I had to leave. That is why I left her there. When our journey to Bristol began with Redruth, I felt quite excited about the voyage. It would be terrific to search about the treasure. When we arrived in Bristol, Mr. Trelawney was waiting for us. "Here you are," he cried. "Bravo! The doctor came here last night from London, and now the ship's company is complete." "When do we sail?" I asked him. "Sail," he said. "We sail tomorrow." Chapter 6. After I had finished my breakfast, I went to give the note that Squire had given me to take to Long John Silver at the Spyglass Inn. As I got into the inn, I could see that it was a rather small one, and most of the customers were seamen. As soon as I got in, someone started to walk toward me. I understood him to be John Silver because he had only one leg, and he was walking with the help of a crutch. He was a tall and strong man with a shining smile on his face. When I read the letter Squire sent, I got afraid that this man could also be a pirate, but just one sight was enough for me to erase this idea from my mind. I knew Blind Pew, I knew Captain, I knew what a pirate looked like, and he couldn't have been one. "Is it you, Mr. Silver?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. He asked who I was just before he noticed the note in my hand. I gave it to him. He looked surprised and said, "Oh, you're the cabin boy he was telling about. Nice to meet you, nice boy." At that moment, a customer stood up and hurried to the door. I recognized him as the man with only 3 fingers on his left hand. He was the man who had come to the Admiral Benbow. "Stop him! He's the black dog!" I shouted. "I don't care who he is. He didn't pay for his drinks. This is all what interests me," he said, and added, "Harry, go and catch him." The man called Harry hurried up to catch the man. "Didn't Trelawney tell you about him or the pirates?" I asked. "Pirates?" He got surprised. "He is one of my everyday customers. I didn't know this at all. He always comes here with a blind man." "Yes, yes, Blind Pew," I cried. "Yes, you're right. His name is Pew," he said. My suspicions all reawakened on finding Black Dog at the Spyglass Inn, and I started to watch the cook narrowly. But when his man Harry came back without the pirate, Silver seemed so angry that I was convinced on the innocence of Long John Silver. "We should tell Mr. Trelawney what's happened," he said. "This is a crucial matter, so I'll come with you." As we walked back, he made himself the most interesting companion, telling me about the different ships we passed by. I began to think it was going to be pleasant with him when we were at sea. When we got to the inn, Dr. Livesey and the squire were waiting for us. Long John told him excitedly about Black Dog. We all regretted that Black Dog had gone away, but there was nothing to do. Trelawney wanted John to call all the crew, reminding they should be on board at 4 o'clock that afternoon. John returned to his inn to do what he was told. "Trelawney," said Dr. Livesey, "I don't put much faith in you most of the time, but I will say this. John Silver seems a good man. Now let's go and see the ship." Chapter 7. Hispaniola was waiting for us in the sea. She seemed so gorgeous. There in the ship, Mr. Arrow, who was so friendly, welcomed us. It was obvious that he got on well with Squire. But things weren't the same between Captain Smollett and Trelawney. Captain seemed so angry with everyone on board. "I don't like this voyage," he told us. "I don't like the men. I don't like my first officer," shortly to say. "Perhaps, sir, your problem is about the ship," inquired the squire, very angry, as I could see. "I can't say that. I haven't even sailed with her," replied the captain. "She seems all right." "Possibly, sir. You don't like your employer either?" asked the squire. Here Dr. Livesey cut in. "Stay a bit. Use of such questions just produce ill feeling in here," he said. Then he turned to the captain and asked why he said he didn't like the cruise. "I was employed on secret orders, sir," Captain stated, "and to sail this ship where the gentleman ordered to sail it. But now I find that everyone knows more than I do. I don't call that fair, do you?" "No," said Dr. Livesey, "I don't." "Also," said the captain, "I learned that we are going to look for treasure. Heard it from my own crew. Now, I don't like treasure voyages at the best of times, and I certainly despise them when they are secret. What is more is, a captain is usually allowed to choose his own crew." "You're right," said the doctor, "and as far as I can see, you don't like Mr. Arrow, do you?" "I don't like him, sir," Captain answered. "He is too friendly with the crew to be as good officer." "So, tell us what you want," said Doctor. "First of all, the men are putting powder and weapons in the front of the ship," said Captain. "You have a good place under the cabin. Why don't you put them there? And if you are bringing 4 of your people, let them sleep here beside the cabin." "What else?" asked Mr. Trelawney. "One more," said the captain. "There has been so much talking already. I'll tell you what I've heard. You have a map of an island. There are crosses on the map to show where treasure and island are. Then he told us the exact distinct where they were. "I never said that," cried the squire, "to anyone." "But the crew knew it, sir," replied the captain. "I don't know who has this map, but I suggest it to be kept secret even from me and Mr. Arrow. Otherwise, I'll ask you to let me leave the ship." "You want us to keep the map a secret. You want all the powder and weapons to be kept near us. In other words, you fear rebellion," the doctor said. "No," the captain replied, and went on. "Sir, no captain could go to sea believing that." The captain went away. "Trelawney," said the doctor, "I believe you have managed to get 2 honest men on board, that man and John Silver." "Yes, you're right," said the squire, "but the captain acts neither like a man nor a good seaman." "Well," said the doctor, "we shall see." When Long John came on board, men were carrying powder and weapons. He came near so quickly and asked, "So, what are you doing?" "These are my orders," said the captain coldly. "You should go quickly. Men will want their supper." "Yes, sir," said John, and disappeared at once. "He's a good man," said the doctor. "Probably," replied Captain Smollett. At that moment I realized that I was quite of the squire's way, and I hated the captain deeply. Chapter 8. We sailed a little before dawn in the morning. I was quite tired, but I didn't care much about it, because everything around me was so new to be paid much attention. I decided to stay on deck. Suddenly, Long John started to sing the song I knew very well. 15 men on the dead man's chest, and the whole crew joined him. Yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum. Even in such an exciting moment, it carried me back to the old Admiral Benbow in a second, and I seemed to hear the voice of the captain singing with them. But soon the sail began to fill with wind, the land and other ships moved past on each side. The Hispaniola had begun her voyage to the Treasure Island. The ship proved to be a good ship. The crew consisted of capable seamen, and captain thoroughly understood his business. Mr. Arrow turned out even worse than the captain had feared. He used to appear on the deck with several signs of drunkenness, but where he got the drink from was a mystery. If someone dared to ask where he got it from, he would only laugh and say nothing at all. He was not seen any more after a dark night with a rough sea. "Overboard," said the captain. "Everything will be better without him." In order to fill the blank of a first officer appeared when Arrow died. Mr. Trelawney helped the crew very much. He had been to sea before and already knew enough to be useful. Also, one of the men, Israel Hands, was useful for this position. He was careful, wily, old, and an experienced seaman who was able to help with almost everything. He was a great friend of Long John Silver. Long John was good to everyone on the ship, and everyone liked him. He was kind to me. He was very keen on his job, and kept the kitchen as clean as a housewife. There was a parrot in a cage in the kitchen. John said he named the parrot Captain Flint after hearing about the famous pirate. Parrot used to shout, "Pieces of 8, pieces of 8, pieces of 8." In the meantime, Squire and Captain Smollett were still on pretty distant terms with one another. The squire never needed to hide this. He hated the captain. The captain spoke with Squire with short and dry words. On the other hand, he was now content with the crew. He started to think that they were much better than he feared, and he thought the ship was a good one. Every man on board seemed well content. I believe that there has never been a ship company so spoiled, with plenty to eat and drink, and a barrel of apples open for any man to take one. It was that apple barrel that saved our lives. That day, everybody on the ship expected to see the Treasure Island. I had finished all my work, so I thought I deserved an apple. The barrel was nearly empty, so I had climbed right inside to get my apple. As I sat there in the dark, I almost fell asleep. Suddenly, the barrel shook. I was just about to jump up when the man began to speak. It was Silver's voice, and before I had heard a dozen words, I wouldn't have shown myself for the whole world. I laid there in the extreme of fear and curiosity, and far from these dozen words, I understood that the lives of the honest men aboard depended upon me alone. "No, not me," said Silver. "Flint was the captain. It was the same battle that I lost my leg, and old Pew lost his sight. Never mind. I got 2,000 from that sale, and now they are safe in a bank at home." "But tell me, what will happen if you can't get home back again?" asked another voice, which I thought I recognized. It was the voice of the youngest seaman aboard. "Gentlemen of fortune pirates live rough," replied Silver. "They live dangerously, they never think for the next moment, and some die by the law. However, they eat and drink the best, and it is hundreds of pounds instead of hundreds of pennies they have in their pockets. But once I'm back from this ship, I'll live like rich. But don't you ever get disappointed. I began life like you, as a young clever seaman without a penny." "Well, I'll tell you now," replied the lad. "I didn't like the job till I had this talk with you, John, but I'm with you now." Then a third man came and sat down with them. "Dick is also with us," said Silver. "I knew that he was," replied the lad. "But how long are you going to wait? I've had enough of Captain Smollett." "There is no need for hurrying," said Silver. "We should wait until the last moment. Captain is a first-class seaman. Moreover, Squire and the doctor have the map. Let them find the treasure and bring it aboard. Then we'll see. I'd rather have Captain Smollett sail us halfway home before I moved, but I know the rest of the others in the island." "But what are we going to do with them?" asked Dick. "What are they going to be? Don't be silly, Dick. They're going to die, of course. We don't want them coming home later, to say what happened. Now, Dick, get me an apple. I'm thirsty," said Silver. I think I was about to die at that moment. As Dick was beginning to rise, Hans offered to have some rum. It was such a lucky escape. Dick went to bring rum when Israel said something to Silver silently. I couldn't understand him, but they sounded to have been important words. He said something like, "No other man to join." It was nice to hear that because it showed that there were still some honest men on board. Just after this, I saw that the moon had risen, and almost at the same time the voice of the lookout shouted, "Land!" Then there was a great rush of feet across the deck. I quickly got out of the barrel and was in time to join Hunter and Dr. Livesey and the rest, at the side of the ship. Away to the southwest of us we saw 2 low hills, about a couple of miles away, and rising behind them a third and a higher hill, whose peak was still buried in the fog. Meanwhile I heard the voice of Captain Smollett giving orders, and Hispaniola turned so that the ship would sail just clear of the island on the east coast. "Has any one of you ever seen that land ahead?" asked Smollett. "I have, sir," said Silver. "Once when I was a cook in a trade ship, we stopped by here. There is a safe place to anchor on the south, behind a little island called the Skeleton Island. Those hills we see are on the Big Island. They are a row running south. The biggest is called Spyglass." "Thank you, my man," said Captain Smollett. "I'll ask you later on to give us help. Now you may go." Then Dr. Livesey shouted my name, meaning to ask me fetch his pipe, but in that little time I spoke to him quickly. "Doctor, call the captain and the squire down to the cabin. I have some terrible news for you." With that message, he turned on his heel and rejoined the other 2. Not long after, word was sent forward that Jim Hawkins was wanted in the cabin. As short as I could make it, I told all of the details of Silver's conversation. Nobody interrupted me until I finished, nor did any one of the 3 of them make a movement, but they kept their eyes upon my face from my first word to last. "Now, Captain," said Squire, "you were right and I was wrong. I await your orders." "Yes, and I've never known a crew planning a murder that showed so many signs before," replied the captain. "Captain," said the doctor, "that's Silver. He's a very remarkable man." "He'd look very remarkable with a rope around his neck," said Captain, before he added, "We must go on, because we can't go back. They would understand it at once. We have some time till the treasure is found, and there are still some honest men on board. Your men, Squire." "As honest as me," agreed Squire. "That's 7, with young Hawkins here." "Who else?" the captain asked. "Probably all men Squire picked before he met Silver," replied the doctor. "No," replied Squire. "Hans was one of mine." "Whatever," said the captain. "Well, gentlemen, we must wait and watch carefully until we know our men." Chapter 9. The next morning there was no wind, and we were half a mile from the eastern coast of the island. In spite of the bright weather, I hated even the idea of Treasure Island, not knowing and being afraid of what would happen there. The ship sailed 3 or 4 miles round the island to a safe place to drop the anchor. We had difficulty pulling the ship. I was in one of the boats that were in charge of pulling. The men in the boats were very tired, so they began to argue pointlessly. Afterwards, they sat around the deck, and even a slight order was taken with angry looks. "Sir," said Captain, "people have had enough of orders." "And who is that?" asked the squire. "Silver, sir," returned the captain. "He is better at smothering things up. He regards himself so. Let's allow the men an afternoon ashore. If they all go, we'll have the ship. If some go, Silver will bring them back in a gentle way." It was so decided. Guns would be given to all the honest men. Hunter, Joyce, and Redruth were taken into our confidence. They were less surprised than we expected them to be. Then Captain went on deck and started talking, addressing the crew. "My lads," he said, "we've had a hot day, all tired and out of sorts. Any man who would like to have this permission to go to the seashore is free for the afternoon. You'll hear a gun half an hour before sundown, which means you are called back." The men began to cheer up. They hopelessly thought they would find treasures lying around on the beach. After some talk, 6 men stayed on board, and the remaining 13 including. Silver got into the small boats. The captain was too bright to be in the way. Then there came into my head the first of the mad notions that contributed so much to save our lives. If 6 men were left by Silver, it was simple to understand that we couldn't take the fight in the ship, and since only 6 were left, it was equally plain that the men who would stay on board had no present need of my assistance. So in a jiffy I went over the ship's side and into the nearest boat. No one took much notice of me, only a voice saying, "Is that you, Jim?" But Silver called from the other boat, wanting to know if it was me. Then I began to worry if I had done the right thing. The crew rowed to the beach, and our boat arrived the land first. I ran toward the trees. Silver and the other were 100 meters behind, but I heard him shouting, "Jim, Jim!" But I took no notice, and I ran straight before my nose, till I could no longer run. I was pleased to lose Long John and others, and began to enjoy myself and look around with some interest on the strange land that I was in. I crossed the wet ground and came to a long, open piece of sand, then went on walking to a place where the trees had branches that were thick and close to the sand. Now I felt for the first time the joy of explorations. The isle was uninhabited. I had left my shipmates behind, and there was nothing in front of me but pure nature and fowls. I turned hither and thither among the trees. Just then I heard distant voices, including Silver's. I hid behind a tree just before I saw Long John Silver and another man of the crew talking together through the leaves. This put me in great fear, and I crawled under as silent as a mouse. "If I didn't take you as a chum, do you think I'd be here warning you, Tom?" Silver was saying. "Silver," said the other man, "you are old and honest, and you have money too, which lots of poor sailors haven't, and you are brave, or with that kind of scoundrel, I guess I'd rather die." Suddenly there was a noise of distant shouting, then a long and horrible scream. I had found one honest man here, and that terrible distant scream told me of another. "John," said the sailor, "in heaven's name, tell me what that was." "That?" returned Silver, smiling away. "That? Oh, I reckon that must be Allen." "Allen?" cried poor sailor. "That honest and true seaman? John Silver, you have been a mate of mine for a long time, but you'll be no more. You've killed Allen, haven't you? Kill me too if you can." The sailor turned his back on Silver and began to walk back to the beach. With a cruel shout he threw his crutch through the air. It hit the poor man between the shoulders, and he fell to the ground with a bitter cry. Silver, as quickly as possible, was above him. He dug his knife into that poor body twice. I don't know what it rightly is to faint, but I do know that for the next little while the whole world swam away from before me in a mist. Silver and the birds, tall Spyglass Hill, and all manner of bells were ringing, distant voices were shouting. When I came again to myself, Silver had pulled himself together, his crutch under his arm, from hat upon his head. He was cleaning the blood from his knife with some grass. As silent as I could be, I began to move away, and as soon as I was clear of trees, I began to run as I had never run before. Could anyone be more entirely lost than me? When the gun fires, now will I go to the ship? Wouldn't first of them to see me coming kill me? Wouldn't my absence itself be an evidence to them of my alarm, and therefore of my fatal knowledge? It was all over, I thought. Goodbye to Hispaniola, goodbye to the squire, the doctor, and the captain. All this while, as I was still running and thinking, I realized that some small stones were falling from the side of a hill. I became more afraid. I searched around, and I saw a sudden jump of a figure behind a tree. I didn't move the boats, yet the figure appeared again and moved with the speed of an animal. As the figure got clearer, I realized that it was a man. I had a pistol with me, which I took in fear that I would have to need it. At that moment, I trusted its presence with me and turned back towards this man. He was hiding behind a tree, but soon stepped out to meet me. I got too frightened, but I acted like I wasn't and asked who he was. "Ben Gunn," he replied. His voice sounded awkward. "I'm poor Ben Gunn," he went on, "alone for 3 years. His clothes were so old and his face was so black that you could hardly deny that he had been on this island for long. I thought he was a friendly man. Sure I had got a pistol, so I tried to learn more about him. "Were you shipwrecked?" I asked. "No, my friend," he replied, "marooned." Luckily I knew what this word meant. It was a cruel punishment often used by pirates, and meant leaving a man alone on some distant, empty island. "I have been marooned for 3 years," he said with a sad voice, "living on wild goats and fish. But for so long, I have been dreaming of English food. Cheese! You don't have cheese with you now, do you? I've dreamt about it many nights." "If I can get on board again," I said, "I can bring you as much as you want." "Who is to prevent you?" he asked. "Please, tell me your name." "Jim," I told him. "Well, Jim," he said, looking around. I think he was afraid of being seen or heard by anyone. He lowered his voice to whisper and said, "I'm rich." I now felt sure that the man had gone crazy in his solitude. "Rich, rich, I say," he went on. "I'll make you my man. Now tell me, that is Flint's ship, isn't it?" I began to think I found an ally. "No," I replied, "Flint's dead, but there are some of Flint's men aboard, which is bad news for us." "The man with one leg?" he asked. "Oh, yes," he said. "That was to be the name." "He is the cook, and of course the ringleader," I said. I told him the whole story of the voyage and how big the danger we were in. "Well, you're all in big trouble," he said as soon as I finished my words. "But don't worry. Ben Gunn's the man who's to be put trust on. Will your squire be generous if I do you think? I don't want him to give me a job, but he will give me £1,000 out of money that's really mine, I think." "I'm sure he will," I replied. "And will you take me home on your ship?" "If we can escape from the other, if we can manage it, I can take you with us too," I promised. He got merry to hear this. "I was in Flint's ship when he and 6 other men hid the treasure," he said. "They stayed on the shore nearly a week. Flint came back alone. Not a man on board could guess how he killed the others. Then I was in another ship 3 years ago. As we were passing this island away, I told them about Flint's treasure and asked them to look for it. They looked for treasure for 12 days and got angry and angry with me day by day. Then they went back to the ship. They left a gun, a spade, and an axe with me and let me there to search the treasure alone. So, Jim, see it? I haven't eaten real food for 3 years, but I've found things to do, yes." Here he smiled at me. "Now go to your squire and tell him that Ben Gunn is a good man who is ready to help." "Okay," I said, "but how will I go to the ship? You know I'm lost." "Oh," said he, "well, there is my boat that I've made myself. I keep her under the white rock in worse situations we must try after dark." For just then, although the sun had still an hour or 2 to go down, the echo of the sound of the ship's gun was heard. "They have begun to fight," I cried. "Follow me!" Chapter 10. We followed the noise of the fighting and finally arrived to a hill. There was a wooden house which had holes for guns on every side and which was big enough for 40 people. Around the house an open piece of land happened to exist, and this land was surrounded with a fence, which was 2 meters high, with no doors, and had openings too strong to pull down easily. After then, Ben Gunn shouted at me that the English flag was flying over the house, and he said, "They must be your friends," excitedly. "It looks more like a pirate's house," I commented. "No," he replied. "Be sure. Silver would put up the pirate's flag, the Jolly Roger. There must have been a fight between them and your friends must have won. They are inside the stockade that Flint made years ago." "Then is there any reason why I'm standing here still?" I asked. "Come with me, will you?" "No, I don't want to come now," he said. "You firstly go and see your friends, and then get the promise. You know where to find me, Jim. And if the pirates prefer to sleep on the shore tonight, they may have unpleasant surprises." The ship's gun boomed again, even 100 meters away. Ben Gunn and I, as if we had decided before, ran his way. There was a fire which continued for 2 hours. Meanwhile, I moved silently through the trees to the shore. There, I saw the Hispaniola lying in the bay, but the Jolly Roger was flying over her. The pirates had gotten on the beach. They were breaking the captain's boat with axes. I watched them go on as I waited for the ship's gun to stop. As soon as it stopped, I ran back to the stockade. "Doctor! Squire! Captain! Hunter! Is that you?" I shouted. As I was climbing into the stockade, I saw Dr. Livesey at the door. I was very happy to see him, and so was he. They all welcomed me, giving us supper. I realized that their food was running out. While I was having my meal, Dr. Livesey told me what had happened when I was away from them. "We heard you had gone to the seaside on one of the boats, Jim," the doctor said. "It never occurred to us to doubt you, but we were alarmed for your safety. Hunter and I came after you to see what was going on. As we were walking around to discover, we saw this stockade. It seemed like a good place to defend ourselves against Silver and his men, because we all knew for sure that they would kill us as soon as they were back on the ship. Here, all we needed was enough food to live. If we had enough people to watch our enemies, we would have no other problem. We have to hide here. Unfortunately, you know Hispaniola must be back in Bristol by the end of August. If the ship isn't there by then, a resave ship will be sent to look for us. As you can guess, we have to hide ourselves here till the rescue ship arrives." "Oh, listen to the plan to get ourselves off the ship, Jim," he went on. "Hunter, Redruth, and Joyce helped us. Hunt managed to bring to the captain's little boat under the cabin windows, and Joyce and I put guns, food, and my medicine chest in it. Redruth, Trelawney, and the captain went on deck with the 4 guns that Redruth took. They were able to surprise Israel Hands and other men, and what's more is, they managed to persuade one man, Abraham Gray, to join us again." "Then you left 5 pirates on the ship?" I asked. "Yes," Dr. Livesey answered. "But we didn't forget to drop the rest of the weapons over the side into the sea before leaving the ship. Unluckily, we forgot the ship's gun. We were halfway to the island when the pirates fired it at us." "Yes, I heard it," I replied. "Trelawney aimed to shoot Hands, but he killed another man instead," the doctor said. "When the pirates on the island heard the sound of the gun, they ran out of trees toward their boats. Then the boat we were on began to sink, and we found ourselves in water. Most of the food was lost, and we had only 2 dry guns with us. Although we were able to reach the beach, everyone was sure that we were going to be attacked." "But you must have killed some of their men," said I. "Yes, lad, you're right," replied Dr. Livesey. "We killed one of their men and wounded another man, poor Tom Redruth." After the doctor finished telling theirs, I told them about my story with all small details. We all agreed on the plan to kill the pirates one by one, until the last one is left to death either by drowning or by sailing away. As the other people were talking, I fell asleep because of my tiredness. Voices and shouting made me wake up the next morning. "A white flag!" heard someone say. "It's Silver!" I ran to a hole in the wall and looked through. 2 men were waiting outside the stockade, one wearing a white cloth. The other was Silver. It was a cold morning, there were no clouds upon the sky, and the weather was bright. But these 2 men were standing in a mist. "What is it?" shouted Captain Smollett. "Captain Silver wants to talk to you about peace," shouted a man who was standing beside Silver. "I've never heard of a captain called Silver," said Smollett. "Who's he?" Long John Silver answered, "It's me, sir. I'm the captain of Hispaniola since you left us. We are willing to make peace if we can all agree. All I want is your promise to allow me safety out of the stockade." "I've nothing to say to you," replied the captain, "but if you insist, then you may come." Silver approached the stockade, threw his crutch over the fence, and then climbed after it. With the greatest difficulty he walked up the hill of soft sand. "Won't you be as kind as to let me inside?" asked Silver. "It's quite cold outside, and I'm sure you wouldn't want me to be ill, would you?" "If you are an honest man, Silver, you would be in your kitchen now," replied the captain. "You're my cook on a dirty pirate. Choose one. Now if you have anything to say it." "Yes," said Silver, "you were very clever last night. One of you is very quick with a knife. Some of my men were very frightened, and who knows, perhaps I was too. The reason why I'm here is obvious, but I'm sure you won't do it again, will you? We'll drink less rum and have more men to watch carefully in case something happens. Though I was asleep, I nearly caught you. The man you knifed was not dead when I reached him." Captain Smollett didn't understand what he was talking about for sure, but I was sure of what had happened. I remember Ben Gunn's last words to me. Each of them may have unpleasant surprises. Perhaps he had visited the pirates during the night before, when pirates were lying around the fire, drunk of rum. "We are those who will get the treasure, and I'm the one who wants it most." "Be sure," said Silver. "I know you have a map. Give it to me, and stop killing poor seamen when they are asleep. I promise I'll let you choose what to do. Either come with us to the ship when we have the treasure and we'll take you to a safe place, or stay here on the island. Choose whatever you think sounds better." "Is that all?" asked Captain Smollett. "This is the last," said Silver. "If you refuse, you are all going to die." "The turn is mine," Captain Smollett said. "Everyone knows you won't be able to find the treasure without the map, and the map is with us. If you want to be back in England, you have no way out except my offers. I know that none of you knows how to sail the ship. You're not well organized enough to fight us, and Gray is with us from now on. If you say no, the next time I see you, I'll shoot you back without an eye blink. Now get out of here at once." Silver was at his most angry moment. "Somebody help me!" he shouted, but no one took him into consideration. Swearing angrily, he pulled himself across the sand to fence. There, he became able to lift himself onto his crutch again, and then climb out of the stockade. "Before an hour!" shouted Silver. "I'll break your poor house like a rum bottle, and those who will die will be the luckiest ones." As soon as Silver went away, we started to prepare for battle by placing ourselves around the stockade. The captain incessantly controlled us to see if everything was in its way. A few seconds later, Joyce fired his pistol and the battle began. Shouts were coming from every side of the stockade, but they couldn't reach us because the thick walls didn't let them get through. Then there became a sudden silence, and all the smoke cleared away. Suddenly, the pirates fired the gins again, and a group of pirates ran from the woods to the stockade. They were climbing over the fence like monkeys as Squire and Gray were trying to fire at them. In a few seconds, 2 pirates fell dead. One was still running back to the trees, and 4 were inside the stockade. The captain suddenly ordered us to fight them in the open. As soon as I took a sword, I ran into the sun. More pirates were climbing into the stockade. I could see one man already standing on the top of the fence. But somehow the fight was over, and the pirates were beaten. Gray cut down one man with his sword. Another pirate was shot as he was firing into the house. He was lying wounded with his smoking pistol with him. The doctor cut down a man. Only one was wounded of the 4 men who had climbed into the stockade. He was climbing out again with a fear of death, and the men on the fence had disappeared back into the trees. When the battle finished, we ran into the house. Out of the 8 men who had fallen in the action, only 3 still breathed. Joyce was shot through the head. Captain's wounds were grievous indeed, but not dangerous. No organ was fatally injured. Hunter was lying still. He had had a knock on his head. Squire was trying to carry the captain. One pirate, Hunter, and Captain Smollett were the 3 men to be alive, but Pirate and Hunter were about to die. Very soon one followed the other. The doctor took care of the captain. He told him not to talk and even not to move if it's not necessary. The next day, the doctor took his sword and pistol with him and went for a walk on the island with the map. I thought he was going to see Ben Gunn and believed that that was very lucky to be out and walk in fresh air. Cool forest. Because the house was very hot and there was a terrible smell of blood everywhere. There were dead bodies, wounded people around. I got bored and finally decided to do something different other than sitting and doing nothing in that smelly house. I knew it was not right to leave only 2 unwounded men to guard the stockade. Then I thought maybe I should go and find Ben Gunn's boat, thinking that it may be useful for us sometime. I knew I shouldn't have left the house secretly, without telling anyone, but I did. I took some bread, enough for filling my pockets, and 2 pistols with their powders with me. And in that precise moment that Gray and Mr. Trelawney were helping the captain, I climbed quickly out of the stockade and ran into the trees. I decided to go toward the east coast. Although it was nearly evening, the weather was still very hot, but when I felt the cool wind on my face, I understood that I was near the sea. At last, I saw the sea and walked along its edge, then up to a small sand-covered rill. Just because Ben Gunn had told me it was under the white rock, I was sure I would find it. Soon after, I found the white rock along the beach, saw the boat hidden in the grass. I knew it was time to go to the stockade, but I behaved greedily and thought to do more, so I sat down to wait, the darkness to come. As it became dark, there were only 2 lights seen at the blackness. One of them was the light fired by the pirates. I knew they were sitting around that fire singing and drinking, and the other was the Hispaniola's light. I carried the small boat on my shoulders and carried it to the edge of the water. Then I put it in the sea. The boat seemed all right and safe enough, but I was not able to control it. It made its way everywhere but mine. The sea carried me to Hispaniola. I was sure if I cut the anchor, hope in an unlucky moment, the Hispaniola would make a sudden move out to sea, and my small boat would be knocked over. So I had taken my knife and nearly cut all the ropes when I heard voices of drunk and angry men coming out of the cabin. Luckily, the wind turned the ship toward me, and then I cut all the way through the rope. As fast as I could, I pushed my little boat along the side of the ship, but I was not hopeful about getting away, before the ship crashed into me. Just as I was giving the final push, my hand found a rope over the end of the ship. All of a sudden, I took the rope and held it unconsciously. I pulled my boat near the ship, and then stood up to see through the cabin window. The 2 men weren't on deck, and I wondered why, but when I looked through the window, the 2 men were fighting, each with a hand round the other's neck. I climbed down into the boat again, looking over my shoulder at the shore. The pirates' fire was just behind me on the beach. Then the wind suddenly and violently turned the Hispaniola, and of course my little boat with it, and we were sailing fast into the open sea. I would hear the sudden shouts and the sound of hurrying feet as the 2 men ran on deck. I lay down, aware that when we reached the open water, that would be the end for me. I lay there in my small boat, helplessly for hours, missing our inn and home so much. I had nothing else to do. The next day, when I woke up, I wasn't able to see the sun above in the sky. It was daylight, though. It wasn't the right place to row ashore, but if I did, I was sure that I would be killed somewhere on the rocks. Moreover, the boat was so small that when I rowed it, it came over the sides of the boat. I thought it would be a better idea to wait until the sea took me somewhere safe on the north side of the island. The only thing was supposed to have done was to keep the water out of the boat and now a little in the smooth places. That work was so tiring and that I couldn't realize that Hispaniola was just a mile away from me. As soon as I looked up and saw her, I figured that everything wasn't all right with her. First, she turned to the north, then all at once to the west again. I was out of control. Then she made a big and a dangerous turn again, as she was coming age and age to my small boat. My small boat was on a wave with me inside. All of a sudden, Hispaniola was almost upon me. I jumped up and pushed the boat under the water. With my feet, I caught one of the ship's ropes. Then Hispaniola hit my little boat, unfortunately. I was left with no way to escape. Chapter 11. I wasn't able to see inside of the house until someone brought a light. 5 pirates were on their feet, and he, the 6th, head only rose up his elbow. He was deadly pale, and he had a blood-stained bandage around his head, which showed that he had recently been wounded. My heart got filled with fear when I couldn't see any prisoners. I started to be curious, and I wondered if they were all dead or not. "So," said Silver, "here you are, Jim Hawkins. At last you dropped in, huh? Welcome, come in. Take it friendly." Then he sat down and began to fill his pipe. They made me stand with my back against the wall. "What have you done with my friends?" I asked. He replied with an arrogant and a bold voice. "Yesterday morning, Mr. Hawkins, Dr. Livesey came down with a white flag with him. 'Captain Silver,' he said, 'the ship's gone, so have your men.' So has Silver. You have lost. We looked at the sea together as soon as he finished his words. The ship wasn't there. He was totally right. Then I started to have conversations with the doctor. We want to leave the house, so you can come there. As for that boy, I don't know where he is. I don't care much. We're about to get sick of him, I can exactly state." These were his words. "They didn't want you any more, Jim. What are you going to do? Are you going to join us?" "Is that all?" I asked. "Well, it's all you are here, my son," returned Silver. "And now I am to choose?" "And now you are to choose," said Silver. "Well," said I am not a fool, and I know pretty well what I have to look for. I've seen lots of deaths since I met you, but there is a thing or two I have to tell you." I replied, and by this time I was quite excited. "And the first is this. Here you are, in bad way. Ship is lost, treasure lost, men lost, your whole business gone away, and if you want to know who did it, it was me. I was in the apple barrel the night we saw land, and I heard you, John, and you, Dick Johnson, and Hans, and I said every word you said to them. And the ship? It was again me who cut the rope and killed Israel Hands and O'Brien. I know more fear than I fear a fly. Kill me if you please, kill me if you wish, but one thing I'll say, and no more. I'll do all I can to save you when you are arrested and brought to trial for privacy. It will be your decision to kill me or not to kill me." I was out of breath, so I stopped, and they were all staring at me as a group of naive sheep. And while they were staring, I started talking again. "And now, Mr. Silver," I said, "I believe you are the best man here, and if things go at the worst, I'll take it kind of you to let the doctor know the way. I see all the happenings." "I will keep it in mind," said Silver. "I have one thing to add to this," said one of the seamen. Morgan was his name. "It was him who knew the black dog. There we go. Kill him." "Stop and wait," shouted Silver. "You can't order people to kill someone. Who are you, Tom Morgan? Stop trying to agitate people. Do you ever want to argue with me? Well, I'm ready. Let Morgan take a knife, and in a minute everyone will see the color of his inside." Morgan paused, but angry whispers and murmurings rose from the others. "Tom's right," said one. Conflicts and disagreements began to arise between the seamen. Some said they thought Morgan was right. Silver got really angry having heard this, and he was serving to his nature for sure. He asked if they could ever be able to follow this plan without him. No man moved, no man answered. There was a long pause after this. I stood straight up against the wall. My heart was still beating as fast as it could. But now I had a ray of hope shining in front of my eyes. Silver lay back, and he was calmer than anyone. His unruly followers were whispering continuously. Silver all of a sudden shouted bravely, "If you don't fight with me, it shows that you accepted to obey my rules. I like this child, Jim Hawkins. He is more a man than any rats of you here in this house. You will not do anything to this boy. You have to lay my orders." They continued whispering, which made Silver really angry. "You must have a lot to say. Let me hear it, or stop talking," he said. "We are all dissatisfied. We will go outside and talk," replied one of the men in the room. Just after, he stepped calmly and brazenly toward the door and disappeared out of the house slowly. One after another, the rest followed his example, each making a salute as he passed. Then, after everyone was gone, Silver was left alone in the room with his torch in his hand. "Well, do you know, Jim? Do you know why they are all out?" asked Silver. "They are going to kill you, and they are going to deny my being their leader." As soon as I looked into the bay and saw that Hispaniola was gone, I knew that it was all over. I knew that I would never have what I had before. Now we must bargain with them. Yes, bargain. I said to myself, if you stand by Jim Hawkins, John, Jim Hawkins is going to stand by you. You are his last card, and he is your last card too. Your life against Long John. You must save Long John from dying under the law. "I will do whatever I can," I said. "Why do you think that doctor gave me the map, Jim? A big trouble is waiting for us." My face expressed a wonder which is so unaffected that he saw the needlessness of further questions and remarks. "He gave me the map, he really did. But don't you think there must be something under that, Jim? There is something under it, good or bad, but there is." I looked out of the window. They were all there, and they began to move together toward the house. "Here they come," I said, and returned to my former position, for it was going to hurt my sense of dignity if they saw me watching them. "Let them come, my lad, let them come. I still have a shot in my gun," Silver said. The door opened, and 5 pirates got in. They pushed one man forward, and he gave something to Silver. Silver carefully looked at the thing that he gave him. "The black spot." "I thought so," he said. "Where might you have got the paper?" "Oh, damn it, you cut it from a Bible." "Oh," said Morgan, "what did I say? It will do no good to us," I said. "No one ever listens to me." "Everything is finished," continued Silver. "You have come to the end. I'm sure you are going to be hung. Whose Bible was it?" "It was Dick's Bible," said one of the men. "Was it really? You had better have your last prayer, Dick," said Silver. "You will need every prayer which is in the book." Then Silver started to examine the black spot again. "I am no longer the captain. You were always brisk for business, and you have the rules by heart, George. I am pleased to see it. You are becoming quite a leading man in this crew. You will be the next captain. I shouldn't wonder. But tell me, what has been wrong lately?" "You can't fool this crew any more, Silver," said George. "You're a funny man. At least you were. But you are over now. You're finished." "I thought you said you knew the rules," returned Silver contemptuously. "At least if you don't, I do. And I still wait here. I'm still your captain. And till I give up, your black spot isn't worth a biscuit. After that, we will see." "Half of the men died," said George. "The ship was lost. We couldn't find the boy. Why did not we kill him indeed?" "Well, I'll answer you. I'll answer all the questions in your mind. Now, you know what I wanted. You all know what I wanted. And you all know if what I wanted had been realized, we would be on the Hispaniola right now. Every dead man that had been killed would be alive and fit with us, full of encouragement. Treasure would be in the hold of Hispaniola. Who put me down? Who blocked this? Who has done it? It was Anderson, and Hans, and you, George Merry." Silver paused, and I could see in the faces of George and his supporters that those words he said were in vain. He continued, "Now this boy, can't you tell how valuable he is? He is the best chance to be used to bargain with. He might be our last chance to be saved. And the doctor? You must be glad enough to have a doctor coming to see you every day. You, John, your head is broken. You, George, you were sick and shaking with fever only a few hours ago. Can't you tell how important it is? I made a good bargain. That's why I let them go." And he threw a paper upon the floor, which I instantly recognized. It was the map on yellow paper with the 3 red crosses on it. Why the doctor had given it to him was more than I could understand. And then the men all tried to touch it like cats upon a mouse. It went from hand to hand, one tearing it from another by the oaths and cries and childish laughters. "Yes," said one of the men, "this is Flint's map, sure enough." George got the map and said, "Yes, this is Flint's map, but how are we going to find the treasure without a ship, huh?" The man looked very happy that they started to shout, "Silver for Captain! Silver is our captain!" Silver smiled and said, "George, I reckon you will have to wait for another turn, friend, and lucky for you, as I am not a revengeful man. But that was never my way. And now, friends, what about this black spot? That is not very good for now, is it? Dick just spoiled his Bible. That's all about it." "Here is something you are supposed to be curious about," said Silver, and gave me a paper. It was round. One side was blank, for it had been the last leaf. The other side contained a verse or something like that. "Without dogs and murderers." Those words took place in my mind at once, and on the blank side it was written with the same material, the one word, "deposed." I had a great curiosity about what they all meant. That was the end of that night's business. Soon after, with our drinks, we lay down to sleep. Meanwhile, Silver threatened George that he would kill him if he proved to be unfaithful. I couldn't close my eyes to sleep easily after we were all done with our drinks. It was a game that I was in. Silver himself slept peacefully, and he snored aloud. Yet I had mercy for him. I felt that my heart was sour for him. A shameful gibbet was waiting for him. The next morning we all woke up, and then a voice cried, "Here's the doctor!" And it was the doctor. I was glad to hear the sound, yet my gladness was not without admixture. "You, doctor, we have a surprise for you," said Silver. "We have quite a surprise for you, doctor," he continued. "We have a little stranger here. He, he, he. A little stranger who slept with his dear friend Silver all night long." He was now inside the stockade. I could hear the difference in the doctor's voice. "Don't tell me that it's Jim," he said. "Absolutely he is," said Silver excitedly. The doctor stopped suddenly, although he didn't speak, and it was some seconds before he was able to move on. Then they started to act like nothing had happened at all, which was really weird. "Well, well, let's see the sick men of yours, Silver," he said. "You are doing well, my friend," he said to the man with the bandaged head. "And you, George, did you take your medicine? Did he take his medicine, men?" "Yes, sir, he took it, sure enough." "Dick doesn't feel well enough, sir," said a voice. "Doesn't he?" replied the doctor. "Well, step up here, Dick, and let me see your tongue. I should have been surprised if he did. Your tongue is fit to frighten anyone. Well, that's done for today. Now I wish I would be able to have a talk with that boy, please." And he nodded his head in my direction carelessly. George Mary was at the door, and he at the first word of the doctor's proposal cried, "No!" and he swore. "Silence!" shouted Silver. "Hawkins," he went on talking with his usual tone of voice, "will you promise not to escape?" I gave him the promise he wanted. "Then, doctor," said Silver, "you just step out of the stockade, and when you are there, I'll bring the boy down on the inside. You are the only one allowed to talk through the fence." The men's anger exploded after the doctor left the house, and Silver was accused of playing double, of trying to make a separate peace for himself, of sacrificing the interests of his supporters and victims, and in one word, of the identical thing he was doing. It seemed to me so obvious, in this case, that I couldn't imagine how he was to turn their anger. But he was much more powerful than the rest of the men there, and his victory last night had given him an extra power. He called them all fools you can imagine, and said it was necessary that I should talk to the doctor. Silver waved the map in front of them. Doctor was waiting for us on the other side of the stockade, and as soon as we were within easy speaking distance, Silver stopped. "The boy will tell you how I saved his life," Silver said through the fence. "Will you say a good word for me?" I don't like even the idea of dying under the law. I'm saving the little boy. Jim Hawkins and I think you'll save my life." "Why, John? You are not afraid, are you?" asked Dr. Livesey. "Doctor, I'm not a coward. No, I'm not," he answered. "If I was, I wouldn't say it. They might hang me in Bristol, but I trust, sir. You are a kind and honest man. I have never seen a better man before. And now I step inside and leave you and Jim alone." After saying that, he stepped back a little way, till the place he wouldn't be able to hear us. There he sat down and began to whistle, spinning round upon his seat so as not to give the impression that he was interested in what we were going to do. "So, Jim," said the doctor sadly, "I'm so disappointed in you. God knows that I cannot find it in my heart to blame you. But you were with us when Captain Smollett was well enough, and you went away when he was wounded, which wasn't a very brave and honest thing to do." I started to cry immediately. I couldn't help finding these words hurtful. "Doctor," I said, "I have blamed myself enough, but I have to do something to save our lives. They are going to kill me, doctor, but I'm not afraid. I have done all my prayers. What I fear is torture. I'm ready to die," I said. "Jim," the doctor interrupted, and his voice was quite changed. "Jim, I can't bear this. Jump over and we will run." "No," said I. "You know that you would not do a thing yourself. Neither you, nor Squire, nor Captain, and no more will I. Silver, he trusted me. I promised him, and I am going to turn back. But, doctor, you did not let me finish. Listen, I have got the ship, and she lies in North Inlet on the southern beach, and just above the high water." "The ship!" exclaimed the doctor. I told him my story about Israel Hands rapidly. I told him about my adventures. "There is a bit of fate in it, Jim. It's so strange that you have been the one who has saved our lives at all times. You found out about the story. You found Ben Gunn. And now you say you took the ship. And do you suppose that by any chance we are going to let you lose yours? That would be a poor and unclean behavior, my boy. It's our turn, Jim. We are going to save your life." Then he called Silver. "I will give you a piece of advice," he continued, as Silver was walking toward us. "Do not be in such a hurry to find the treasure." "Sir," said Silver, "what are you after? Why did you leave the blockhouse? Why did you give me that map? I don't know. Do I? I don't understand why you all did those if you didn't want me to find the treasure." "No," said the doctor musingly, "I have no right to say more. It's not my secret, you see, Silver, but I give you my word that I would tell you if it was mine. Let me give you a bit of hope. If we both get out of here alive, Silver, I'll do my best to save you." "You couldn't tell much more, sir, I'm sure, even if I was your father," Silver cried. "Do you want to hear my second advice? Keep the boy close beside you, and when you need help, just try shouting for it. And, goodbye, Jim," the doctor said. Dr. Livesey shook hands with me through the stockade and hurried off into the woods. Chapter 12. "Jim," said Silver when we were alone, "if I saved your life, it means that you saved mine, and I will never forget it. I have seen the doctor asking you to run away and escape. Yes, I did, and I have seen you say no, just because you promised me not to." Just then a man shouted that the breakfast was ready, and we were soon seated. I never in my life saw men so careless of the principles of respect. Hand to mouth is the only word that can describe their way of eating. Even Silver, with Captain Flint upon his shoulder, did not say a word for their recklessness. "Do you wonder, guys, what have we talked about with the doctor?" asked Silver. "Yes, sure!" shouted the pirates. "He said they have the ship for sure. I don't know where she is yet, but once we hit the treasure, we will have to find out." He kept talking like that with his mouth full of the hot bacon. He was restoring his men's hope and confidence, and was repairing his own. "I'll keep the boy close to me," he continued, "when we look for the treasure. Then, after we have both the treasure and the ship, we will persuade Jim to join us. We will talk him over, and we will give him his share from the treasure, for all his kindness." It was for sure that the men were in good humor. For my part, I was terribly afraid, because John had already changed his mind and made another plan. If Silver's plan was to come true, he would certainly forget Dr. Livesey and the other men. And what a moment would it be when the suspicions of his followers turned to certainty, and he and I should have to fight for our lives. He, a one-legged man, and I a boy, against 5 strong and active seamen. When we were leaving the house, everyone but me was armed. Everyone was carrying his weapon, but I wasn't given anything. Silver had 2 guns with him, one before and one behind, and to complete his strange appearance, he had Captain Flint sitting on his shoulder. I had a rope about my waist, and followed Silver obediently, who had the other side of the rope. I was like a dancing bear. It was so embarrassing. Some of the men were carrying spades, and others were both carrying food and rum. We made our way to the beach, where 2 boats were waiting for us. The men always talked about the map. The cross was too large to be of much help, and the words on the back of the map were no better. Tall tree, spyglass shoulder, bearing a point to the north of the north-northeast. Skeleton Island, east-southeast and by east, 10 feet. A tall tree was thus the most obvious mark to be recognized, but all the directions were not for certain, as anyone could tell. So Silver said, "This is not really Claire, but we have a pair of binoculars." And then he pointed out the hill and continued, "Now find the tallest tree, guys." We pulled easily by Silver's directions, and after a quite long passage, landed at the mouth of a second river that runs down through the spyglass. 3 of the men went to left, and 2 made their way to the right side. We were there with Silver. I tethered by my rope. He was pulling with his deep pants and sliding belt. From time to time, indeed, I had to give him my hand, or he would certainly have fallen down. We heard a man cry aloud, the man upon the farthest left, as if he was in terror. Shout after shout came from him, and others began to run into his direction. "He can't have found the treasure," said old Morgan, hurrying past us from the right. And indeed, when we reached there, we also figured that it was something very different, the bones of a human skeleton, a few pieces of clothing still on it. Everyone was frightened. "He must have been a sailor," said George Mary, who behaved more bravely than anyone, and who had gone up closer to the skeleton and examined the pieces of cloth. "At least, this is a good sea cloth." "What do you mean? Of course he was a sailor. How can you find a deserted bishop in a deserted island?" asked Silver. "But look at the way these bones are lying. It's not natural. It must have been put here by Flint. Look at the man laid perfectly straight, his feet pointing one way and his head pointing the opposite. These bones are a pointer, telling us which way to go." He was right. On the second look to the skeleton, everyone would find it impossible to fancy that the body was in its natural position. But for some unknown reason, the body was lying perfectly straight. Our compass showed that the body pointed straight toward Skeleton Island, and in a line east-south-east by east. Everyone was terrified. Despite the hot sun and daylight, the pirates could no longer run separately and shout through the wood, but keep close to each other and speak with their lowest voices. The terror of the dead seamen had fallen on their spirits. We left the Skeleton Island and kept walking. But now there was another danger. The pirates began to get together and talk in frightened whispers. At the top of the hill, Silver took out his compass again. "There are 3 tall trees here," he said. "In about the right line from Skeleton Island. Spyglass Shoulder must be that lower place there. A child could find the treasure now, it's so easy." Suddenly, out of the middle of the trees, a high voice began to sing, "15 men on the dead man's chest, yo-ho-ho, and a bottle of rum." I have never seen a group of men more affected than they were then. The color went from their 6 faces, and they were arm in arm, caught hold of each other like frightened children. Morgan fell to the ground with trembling fear. "It's Flint!" cried George Mary. The song suddenly stopped as it began, as if someone in the middle of a note had laid his hand upon the singer's mouth. "Come on," said Silver. "Don't you all know that he's dead? Someone's trying to play a game on us. It's no ghost." His courage came back as he spoke. He spoke as his courage came back. Others were starting to give an ear to this encouragement, beginning to feel better as the same voice broke out again, not singing this time. "Darby McGraw!" it screamed again and again. "Darby McGraw, fetch the rum!" The seamen were staring with frightened eyes. Even long after the voice died away, they still sat in silence, dreadfully. Their hearts were full of horror. "That shows it," said one. "Let's go." "Those were his last words on board," said Morgan. Dick took his Bible out and started to pray. He was very well brought up. Silver was also very afraid, but he didn't surrender so easily. "No one in this island ever heard of Darby," Silver said. And then obviously with a great effort he continued, "Shipmates, I'm here to get the treasure, and I will not be beaten by a man or devil. I was never afraid of him during his lifetime, and I can face him dead. We're talking about 700,000 pounds, and we are very near. I will not leave so much money for an old drunken and coward seaman, and if this man died years ago—" There was no sign of reawakening courage in his followers after those words. There was only growing terror that was visible in their faces. "There is one thing not clear to me." There was an echo. "We never see the shadows of the ghosts, so why should we hear their voices echo?" asked Silver. "Is this natural?" Silver's words calmed the pirates down, and George Merry, to me, seemed greatly relieved. "Well, that's so," George said. "Yes, I know it was like Flint's voice, but it wasn't. It certainly was not. It was more like another voice. More like—" "Ben Gunn!" shouted Silver. "Yes, it was," cried Morgan. "If it was Ben Gunn, he could be called dead, too," said Dick. "Why, nobody minds Ben Gunn," cried Mary. "Dead or alive, nobody minds him." Their moods had returned extraordinarily rapidly, and their faces' natural color revived again. Soon they were chatting together with breaks of listening, and not long after hearing no more sound, they packed their things and set forth again, Mary walking first with Silver's compass to keep them on the right line with Skeleton Island. He had said the truth. Dead or alive, no one minded Ben Gunn. Dick alone still held his Bible, and looked around him as he went, with fearful looks, but he couldn't feel comfortable, and Silver even joked him on his precautions. It was fine open walking here. On the summit in our way lay a little downhill. The pines, great and small, grew wide apart. We reached the first of the tall trees, but it proved to be the wrong one. Just after we had found the second one, we understood that it was also not the right one. The third one was nearly 200 meters into the air, and it was even probably seeable from the sea. But it was not its size that now impressed us. It was the knowledge that 700,000 pounds in gold lay somewhere buried below its shadows. The thought of the money finished all of the terror in the air. All of the pirates' eyes burned in their heads. Their feet grew speedier and lighter. Their whole soul was with the fortune, the luxury, comfort and pleasure for the rest of their lives lay there. Silver pulled at the rope that held me to him, and from time to time turned his eyes on me with a deadly look. He was not hiding his thoughts. I certainly read them. In the nearness of gold he forgot anything else. His promise and the doctor's warning were something that belonged to the past. I was sure that he would die for the idea of finding the treasure and killing every honest man on the island, finding a boat to the Hispaniola at night, and sailing away as a rich man. I was shaken with those kinds of alarms, so it was hard for me to keep the treasure hunter's pace. Suddenly, George Merry shouted, "All together, boys!" and all the other men began to run. Silver's pace doubled, and the next moment we were with them. Before us was a huge hole, but it was not a new hole because there was grass grown on its bottom. There was no treasure. The 700 pounds were gone. Chapter 13. There was never such an overturn in this world. These 6 men were as they were struck by thunder. But with Silver, the case was not as bad as it was with the others. Every thought of his soul had been set on that money. But he found out his temper and changed his plan before the others had time to realize the disappointment. "Jim," Silver whispered, "take that and be ready for trouble." And he gave me a pistol. At the same time, he began to move quietly, and after a few steps, the huge hole was between us and the other 5. Then he looked at me and nodded, as much as to say, "Here is a narrow corner," which I thought it was. His looks were now quite friendly, and I was so used to these changes that I couldn't help whispering, "So, Silver, you've changed sides again." There was no time for him to answer. The pirates, with oaths and cries, began to jump into the hole and dig with their fingers. Then, Morgan found a piece of gold. It went from hand to hand among them for a quarter of a minute. 2 guineas! cried Mary, shaking the gold at Silver. That's your 700,000 pounds, is it? You're the man for bargains, aren't you? You're the man who never ever made a mistake, huh? Do you think you're a perfect man, you rubbish? Ah, Mary, standing against your captain again, huh? Do you want to try to be the captain again? But this time everyone was entirely in favor of Mary. They all began to climb out of the hole. One thing I observed, which looked well for us, they all got out upon the opposite side from Silver. Well, we stood there, we on one side, and the rest, the other 5 men, on the other side of the hole. Nobody could dare offer the first blow. Everyone was so angry and nervous. Silver never moved. He watched them, standing in an upright position, and he looked as cool as I ever saw him. He was quite brave, it was obvious. At last, Mary seemed to have thought that a speech could make the case better. "Friends," he said, "2 of them are here, standing right there, looking at us. One of them is this one-legged man who brought us here for nothing, and the other one is that boy that I am going to have the heart of." He was raising his arm and his voice, which essentially meant that he was about to order his followers to shoot us. But just then, crack, 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 3 gunshots came from the wood. Mary fell down spinning into the hole. He was dead. So was one of his men. In a time period shorter than a second, Silver fired at Mary, into the hole for 2 times, to make sure that he was definitely dead. Mary turned his eyes in his last moment and said, "George, I think I settled you." At the same moment, the doctor, Gray, and Ben Gunn joined us among the trees, with their guns in their hands. "Run!" cried the doctor. "Double quick! My lads don't let them get into the boats before us." We started to run like cheetahs, but Silver was anxious to keep up with us. He was 30 meters behind us when we reached the slope. "Doctor," he said, "we don't need to hurry. Look!" We saw that he was right. In a more open part of the forest, we could see that the other 3 pirates were still running in the same direction as they had started, right for Mizzenmast Hill. We were already between them and the boats, so we wanted to sit down a bit and have a rest. We 4 sat down to breathe, while Long John slowly was reaching us. "Thank you, Doctor," he said. "You came in time to save me and Hawkins." Then he turned to Ben Gunn and said, "So you are also great, Ben Gunn." The doctor sent Gray back for one of the pickaxes, and as we were waiting for him, having nothing to do at all, we had a few words, at least related to what has taken place. It was a story that interested Silver, and Ben Gunn, who was the hero from beginning to the end. Ben told us that in his long and lonely wanderings about the island he found the skeleton. It was him that rifled it. He had found the treasure. He had dug it up. He had carried it on his back, in many tiring journeys, to his cave at the 2-pointed hill at the northeast of the island, and it had been there in safety 2 months before the arrival of the Hispaniola. When the doctor had learned this secret from him on the afternoon of the attack, and when, next morning, he saw the anchorage deserted, he had gone to Silver, gave him the map, which was now useless, given him the food, because Ben Gunn had a lot in his cave. That morning, when Doctor found out that I was also involved in the horrible disappointment he had prepared for the pirates, he ran all the way to the cave, and he left Squire to guard the captain, took Gray and Ben with him to be ready to help us. "Ah," said Silver, "it was very lucky for me to have had Hawkins with me, or old John would be dead by now for sure." By this time we reached at the boats. This was a run of 8 or 9 miles. Silver thought he was almost killed because he was too tired, was soon over a smooth sea. Then we reached at the boats. The doctor destroyed one of the boats with an axe, and we all got into the other one and rowed slowly to Hispaniola. The sea was high enough to take her from the beach, so she was in the sea moving freely now. We went round the Rum Cove first, the nearest point for Ben Gunn's treasure house. Then Gray left us there before rowing back to guard the ship for the night. At the top we met with Squire. I think he was really kind and cordial, that he said nothing on my escape, either as a blame or praise. Then Doctor turned to Silver and said, "John Silver, I am told not to prosecute you. I will not. But the dead man, the men you have killed, are a shame of yours." "Thank you very much, sir," replied Silver. "You should thank me," cried Squire. "It was my duty to do that." And then we all entered the cave. It was large, fresh and airy place, with a little spring and a pool of clean water. The floor was sand. Before a big fire lay Captain Smollett. That was Flint's treasure that we had come so far to seek, and that had cost already the lives of 17 men from Hispaniola. This was our story. This was the story we knew. But what about the others? Perhaps no man alive could tell how many other people died for the sake of this treasure, or how many ships had sunk there before. Yet there were still 3 upon the island, Silver, Morgan, and Ben Gunn, who had each taken his share in these crimes, as each had hoped in vain to share the reward. That evening I had the most wonderful supper I had in my lifetime. No man could ever be happier than I was. And there was Silver with us, sitting back almost out of the firelight, but eating heartily, ready to do anything that was wanted from him, even sometimes joining quietly in our laughter. The next morning we started to work early. We had to transport all the treasure to the beach, a way of about a mile, and then 3 miles to the Hispaniola. And this was such a hard task for so small a number of a workman. The 3 pirates on the island didn't trouble us, so we thought. We could leave them on the island as well, as a reward. Gray and Ben came and went with the boat, carrying the mass of gold from the beach to the Hispaniola, while the rest, during their absences, carried the treasure on the beach. The treasure was made up of a strange collection. I think I had never had more pleasure than in sorting them out. English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, George and Laos, doubloons and double guineas, pictures of all kings of Europe for the last 100 years. Strange oriental pieces were all together. After carrying all the treasure to Hispaniola, we began to sail in the sea. The 3 pirates must have been watching us closer than we thought, for we left food, clothes, medicine, and powder for them. It was just at sundown when we stopped in a most beautiful distinct, and we were immediately surrounded by shore boats full of black people and Mexican Indians, selling fruit and vegetables. The sight of so many good-humored faces, especially the blacks, the taste of the tropical fruits, and above all, the lights that began to shine in the town, made the most charming contrast to our dark and bloody days on the island. Ben Gunn was on deck alone, and, as soon as we came on board, he began to tell us something. Silver was gone, but he wasn't gone empty. He took a bag of coins, perhaps 300 or 400 guineas, with him. I think we were all so pleased to get rid of him so cheaply. We made a good cruise home, and the Hispaniola reached Bristol. Only 5 men were back out of the 23. All of us shared the treasure, and used it wisely or foolishly, according to our natures. Captain Smollett is now retired from the sea. Gray not only saved money, but also studied his profession and married besides. He is currently the father of a family. As for Ben Gunn, he got £1,000, which he spent or lost in 3 weeks, or to be more exact, in 19 days, and he was back begging on the 20th. Of Silver we have heard no more. That scoundrel with 1 leg has at last gone out of our lives. But I guess he met his old negress, and perhaps still lives in comfort with her and Captain Flint. I should hope so, because his chances in another world to be comfortable are very small. I never wanted to turn to Treasure Island, and I won't, but in my dreams I still hear the sharp, high scream of Captain Flint the parrot. "Pieces of 8! Pieces of 8! Pieces of 8!"